Guys, this is Ryan with South Dakotans Against Prohibition. I'm here at Frying Pan on West 12th, and I'm joined today by Mike Myers. He's running for governor of South Dakota. He's an independent, and he's got some things to talk about as far as medical practices and his position on medical cannabis and how he came to that conclusion. So, say hi, Mike.
Ryan, nice to be here.
So, you were just talking to me before we turned the camera on about some of the medical stuff going on and a bill that you had ran forward before about disclosing the price of what things like x-rays cost and MRIs and things like that. And it was opposed. Why would you say that happened?
Well, as you know, I've taught healthcare law and elder law and health economics for 26 years. I was a former CEO of the 1,000-bed Mayo St. Mary's Hospital, transition CEO of the 850-bed Fairview Riverside Medical Center in Minneapolis. I put together St. Vincent and St. Joseph Mercy Hospitals in Sioux City. 26 years of teaching the subject, 18 years of being a high-level executive. I know where the money comes from, I know where it goes, and I know why it ends up where it does. And Ryan, we're talking about the adventures of third-party payment and something called moral hazard. And as I mentioned previously, I often would ask my students, have you ever engaged in moral hazard? And they would kind of drop their head, and I would say, no, I'm not talking about that type of moral hazard. I'm talking about economic moral hazard where you can walk into a clinic or a hospital and exit having received $500,000 to $1 million worth of services and be essentially indifferent and have no knowledge of the cost of the benefit you received. And also, as I advised last year, in my last year of teaching at the law school, I drafted a proposed statute entitled the Healthcare Financial Informed Consent Act. And that would require providers, hospitals, clinics, pharmacies, sellers of both services and medical items to, prior to its delivery, to disclose the sticker price, understanding that the provider may not have a full understanding of your deductible, copay, your third-party payment, but they do have all those thousands of codes that they punch in, and that can pop up the sticker price. And I have dealt with something known as medical billing advocacy. So I think this whole healthcare area is taking old people, young people, the working stiffs, and making their life one of a potential trip down to the bankruptcy court.
Nobody wants to get bankrupt. The people of the 605 really have some of the lowest wages in the country from what I've seen, at least in my industry. I'm a food worker. I do pizza delivery. I've been a career cook, and I can't say that I've ever made over $10 an hour in that field. And what would you say, as the governor, the minimum wage of South Dakota should be for the cost of living in South Dakota?
Well, first of all, let's address the question, should there be a minimum wage at all? And we had debates and discussions over at the School of Business, and philosophically I can see someone contending that we ought not to require an employer to pay a minimum wage. If someone wants to work for $2 an hour and is willing to do that, they should be allowed to do that. That's that broad philosophical discussion. But then you move over into the reality of how money moves around, and we know that Henry Ford one time paid his workers $5 a day because he wanted his workers to have the ability to buy the very product that they were building. Once we have come to the conclusion that there ought to be, as a matter of good sound public policy, a minimum wage to allow the broad base of people to keep the economy vibrant, then I would contend we ought to insert that into a time, an economic period that we felt was appropriate and beneficial. And as inflation grew or as deflation entered, we ought to take that minimum wage and track it to the actual cost of living. And I happen to, my wife passed away 7 years ago. I live alone, and a major part of my diet is shredded wheat, cashews, and whole milk. I went to the store the other day and I picked up my gallon of whole milk, $5.80. I picked up my shredded wheat, $4.80. So under that $10 minimum wage, I'd have to work an hour for a gallon of milk and some shredded wheat. Jump in your car and roll down the road, and for $3.80 a gallon. So we need to sit down and have a discussion about there ought to be a system. We need to develop a system where the broad base, the working stiffs, the people trying to raise a family, paying high health care, we need to have a good, solid, honest discussion, move beyond the philosophical part, and find a way to make sure that people can earn a living, and that's going to benefit all of us, both the employers, the employees, because if we don't have the right kind of wage earners out there, places like this frying pan are going to go out of business.
Oh, absolutely. Because if nobody can afford to make it to work, then it's not even worth going to work anymore.
I just talked with a couple last night down at the Centerville Steakhouse. He's 62. He works in Yankton. She works in Sioux Falls. They drop like $150 a week just on gasoline alone.
Exactly.
That's more than that, going back and forth. And he is approaching a time where you might be encountering a little bit of age discrimination when you get to be 62 or 59 or 60. You're at risk of someone saying maybe you've outlived your usefulness here. Age discrimination, potential for losing your job. So here we have, here's a gentleman, 62. He's not too sure how much longer they're looking real close at him. And I had another 62-year-old guy working on my house and said, Mike, my monthly health insurance premium just went from $740 a month to $980 a month. Virtually almost $1,000 a month at age 62. This carrier is Blue Cross Blue Shield, independent theoretically, non-profit. Can you imagine paying $1,000 a month as you stand there waiting to get into Medicare? And he's had some heart problems. So if he's not insured and he walks into that hospital, his lifetime savings are gone. If you're a small businessman and you're not insuring your employees, you potentially will go bankrupt. We got a healthcare system that if you brought the most brilliant economists in the world together and locked them up in a conference room for a week, you couldn't put together a healthcare system more destructive and more threatening to a viable economy than the one that we created here, because we commingled capitalism, for-profit, third-party payment, economic moral hazard. And one thing about Laura Hubble, she's a contender on the Republican side.
Yes, we talked with her the other day over at Thomas Ellie's.
And myself, she's a nurse. Came out of that background in healthcare and has a deep appreciation for how it functions. And clearly, as a CEO of large hospitals and teaching it, I understand the incentive that I built into all those contracts. Oh, we need to take a look at it. We need to take a look at it, and we need to educate people, and we need to reward people for A, staying healthy, educate them with regard to something known as iatrogenesis, Ivan Illich, medical nemesis, the expropriation of health, and he reminded us that iatrogenesis is the third leading cause of death in the United States. And people say, well, what's iatrogenesis? We know that cancer is number one, or heart disease is number one, cancer two, iatrogenesis three, or maybe iatrogenesis is number two, depending upon what numbers and what studies you want to accept. But iatrogenesis is nothing more than the side effects and the byproduct and the result and the risks related to walking in and having surgery, radiation, chemotherapy. And we know that chemotherapy saves, but chemotherapy kills. So if I were to have cancer, and at my age, 77, I probably have some type of prostate cancer. I did an article on the Mayo Clinic and blue eyes. You might as well have blue eyes as to having a PSA exam, because we all have the false positives are out there in a very large way. What I'm driving at is that the risks associated with radiation, chemotherapy, drugs, and the chemotherapy that saves but also kills. I want to sit down with my doctor if I have cancer and have a discussion. And he can say, Mike, we can give you some radiation, we can throw you through a round of chemotherapy, which, by the way, is incredibly profitable. Doctor, you have a heck of an incentive, do you not, to put me on chemotherapy? So we can sit down and I can pull down a $500,000, $500,000 of chemotherapy. What about $5,000 or $50,000 for medical marijuana? I'll take the medical marijuana, $5,000, $15,000, $20,000, in contrast to the $500,000 of chemotherapy and the risk associated with that. And I just want to have a discussion with that. And if I and my doctor decide to go down the $5,000 route for medical marijuana, I want to be able to do that and not have the state of South Dakota, the feds come in and say, thou shalt not engage in medical marijuana, because, as I told you before the program, collecting signatures for my petition. A nice young lady just graduated from college. Does a nice job with an insurance company. She thanked me for supporting medical marijuana. She said, for the last 7 years, I've had an eating disorder, and the only thing that would help me overcome that eating disorder was marijuana. And she said, I've been doing that secretly for 4 years. Can you imagine that? She's down there secretly ingesting a marijuana that has helped her go through the eating disorder. And if the sheriff or the local constable was aware of that, they could walk in the privacy of her home and arrest her. She's growing the stuff herself. That's wrong.
Absolutely.
That's not America, and that's not freedom, and I'll stand up with, and I'll debate that with anyone. Leave her alone. Don't force her into chemotherapy if you're a late person with cancer. I want to get out there and have an honest discussion about that, and I believe we're a group of hypocrites because Big Pharma steps in and blocks that because A, it's an herb, it can't be patented, and that ties in, of course, to my, I'm an advocate for industrial and agricultural hemp, which could turn some of those reservations into a profitable location, a billion-dollar industry. And each morning I mix into my milk, into my breakfast foods, I mix up hemp protein that I buy through Hy-Vee. which is basically bought through a Canadian outlet. You mean to tell me we can't put together hemp protein in this nation, in the United States?
Yeah, it makes
You have to get it from Canada?
It makes no sense to import something from Canada that you could grow right here in South Dakota.
That's right, and I can buy from Hy-Vee, and I've got a nice gentleman by the name of Joseph Bogle, and of course down in Naples they sell it at the grocery store down there as well. But we got a hangover from that war on drugs and the image of anything related to hemp. They talk about hemp produces rope. Rope rhymed with dope. Dope ties to marijuana. I mean this whole. That's why I'm saying you can't grow hemp, and of course it's all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't have, because marijuana is a byproduct of hemp. Then you can make a strong argument that we ought to prohibit the growing of corn, because after all, whiskey is a byproduct of corn, and we know that whiskey's done a lot of harm. So I believe we have to sit down and have a healthy discussion and move beyond the lobbying power of big pharma and outdated thoughts about marijuana and consumption. And I believe that's something that I want to continue to make part of my platform, and it does tie into my thrust on healthcare reform, taking Obamacare and converting that into Myers, Mayo Care, where we reward people for staying healthy, and we're going to use the Mayo parameters to measure incomes, utilization rates. And I want to sit down with some of my old colleagues, healthcare executives, doctors, and have an open discussion on my podcasts. And I'll be, I have admittedly been pushing back against that vertical integration of healthcare, where they're both the payers and the buyers and the collectors. I asked the question, where is Teddy Roosevelt when we need him? And so essentially our healthcare systems now sit in a revolving chair, and they ask themselves, how much should we pay ourselves for the following 15,000 codes? Conflict of interest, making 20 to 30% off collecting the money through the insurance vehicle, making 20 to 30% off of selling the product, and then they pay themselves 1/3 of every dollar they collect through their own collection agencies. This system needs to be cleaned up, looked at, talked about, and we have some great aspects of a strong healthcare system. I realize there's tens of thousands of employees. It's a vibrant system, but we have to ask ourselves, what are we buying, and what's it costing us, and what can we do to slow up the direction it's taking?
I did have one final question. You've been around South Dakota for a few years.
I grew up here, yes.
In your time in South Dakota, would you say that DUIs have been a bigger problem on the road than cannabis?
Unquestionably. My research suggests that, yes, it has been. DUIs. And you're talking about
Alcohol.
Alcohol, well.
On the road versus cannabis.
We had a comment the other day, and of course, we've been able to control the, I frequently, after 4 in the afternoon, I've got a tin cup, and I enjoy a cup. Sometimes these are tin cups, small tin cups of red wine, red Cabernet, and I'm sure the wine is something I enjoy. It affects my behavior, and we have other beverages out there, and we've been able to live with that. Comment on the other day talked about I'd rather have a person who's ingested marijuana versus one who just had a couple of 3 shots of Jack Daniels. Obviously, all these, and we're talking about prescription drugs that affect people's behavior and.
Yes, there was just a murder in Sioux Falls. like 3 days ago over OxyContin.
Yes, yes. So I believe
Horrible.
our focus on marijuana is something that we have to have an honest discussion about all of it. With medical marijuana, I believe that, yes, don't we have a famous country song gentleman in his 80s that's going to come into town and talk about that?
We're trying to make contact with him.
Willie Nelson
Yeah.
is an advocate of medical marijuana. Is that right?
Yes, he is.
Well, I like to sing a song with Willie.
Oh, I would too.
Well, we could do that.
Yeah. We'll see what we can get done here.
All right.
But we've got about 20 minutes so far, and the upload limit for Facebook is about 20 minutes, so we're going to cut off here. But this is Mike Myers for South Dakota Governor. So check him out on Facebook. You've seen some of his links through SDAP, and this is one of his campaign posters. You have anything else you'd like to say to the people before we go today?
I'm not for sale.
Not for sale.
And I don't like bullies because of the concentration of political power. So
Absolutely.
I believe, I'm going to stay with this ride. And by the way, as of this afternoon, I have more than enough signatures on my petition to get through that Secretary of State's office, and I'm going to be on the ballot, and I'll be campaigning the hard way over the next 5 months. Look for me to show up, and perhaps we can talk more about these topics, Ryan.
Absolutely.
All right.
This is Ryan with South Dakotans Against Prohibition signing out.